My name is Braden Wallace, 67 years old, and after 4 decades building Wallace Engineering from my garage into a $25 million company, I thought my retirement party would be the crowning achievement of my life. Instead, it became the night I discovered just how far greed can push someone to betray their own family. When I saw my daughter-in-law Lauren slip something into my champagne glass, my entire world shifted. If you want to hear what happened next, please like and subscribe from wherever you are watching. I grew up in a small town called Millville in central Pennsylvania, where my father worked at the local paper mill and my mother taught 2nd grade at the elementary school. We lived modestly in a 3-bedroom house with worn carpets and drafty windows, but my parents instilled in me the values that would later build my empire: hard work, integrity, and perseverance. After earning my engineering degree through scholarships and night shifts at a gas station, I started tinkering with industrial valve designs in my parents' garage. That garage became the birthplace of Wallace Engineering in 1978. I remember the smell of metal shavings and motor oil, working late into the night after my day job, dreaming of something bigger. The early years were brutal. I missed my nephew's baptism to finish a prototype. I worked through pneumonia to meet a deadline for our first major client. My first marriage collapsed under the weight of my obsession with the company. Patricia left after 3 years, telling me she felt like she was married to the business, not to me. She wasn't wrong. Success came slowly, then all at once. By 1985, I had 6 employees in a small workshop. By 1990, we had 30 employees and our first proper facility. Our valve technology became the industry standard for chemical plants across the Midwest. I reinvested everything, living in the same modest apartment even as the company valuation crossed the $1 million mark. I met Margaret at an engineering conference in Chicago in 1982. She was representing a supplier firm, brilliant and beautiful with auburn hair and a laugh that echoed across the convention hall. We debated valve tolerances over coffee, and I knew she was special when she corrected my calculations on a napkin. It took me 3 attempts to get her to agree to dinner. Our courtship was brief but certain, and we married 11 months after meeting. Margaret gave up her promising career to support mine, something I never asked for but will be eternally grateful for. She became the heart of our home while I built the business. When our son Thomas was born in 1984, she somehow managed to raise him while still finding time to proofread my proposals and organize our company Christmas parties. Thomas grew up in the shadow of Wallace Engineering. As a boy, he would visit the factory floor, eyes wide at the massive machines and the respectful way the employees treated me. I wanted him to learn the business from the ground up, so during summers in high school, he worked in various departments. He was bright, but lacked the hunger that drove me. Where I saw challenges, he saw obstacles. Where I worked weekends voluntarily, he watched the clock. Thomas met Lauren during his junior year at Penn State. He brought her home for Thanksgiving, a stunning girl with perfect posture and designer clothes. I remember thinking she seemed too polished for our family dinner table, but Margaret nudged me under the table when I started asking too many questions about her family. Lauren came from money, old Philadelphia money, though I would later discover that fortune had dwindled significantly over the generations. Their wedding was an extravagant affair at the Rittenhouse Hotel in Philadelphia. Lauren had very specific visions, and the budget kept expanding. Margaret suggested something more modest, but I wanted my only son to have everything I never did. $200,000 later, Lauren had her dream wedding, and I had the first inkling that perhaps her taste for luxury would become an issue. Thomas joined the family business after getting his MBA. I created a position for him as operations director, hoping he would eventually take over. He showed flashes of brilliance, and the employees respected him, but he lacked initiative. Projects I would have completed in weeks took him months. Client meetings I would have secured with one call required him multiple attempts. I began to worry about succession planning. Lauren never worked after they married. She had a brief stint at an art gallery, more for social connections than income. She redecorated their house 3 times in 5 years. There were charity lunches, spa weekends, and shopping trips to New York. I didn't mind supporting them at first. Business was good, and I wanted Thomas to have a beautiful home and wife. As the years passed, I noticed Lauren's expectations growing. The annual family vacation to the Outer Banks became too pedestrian. She pushed for trips to Bali and the Amalfi Coast. Thomas began dropping hints about needing more income. Their credit card statements, which came to the company accountant because I was covering them, showed alarming patterns of spending. Last year, at 66, I received an offer I couldn't refuse. Contech Industries wanted to acquire Wallace Engineering for $25 million. After 4 decades of 60-hour weeks and missed family dinners, I was ready. The time had come to enjoy the fruits of my labor with Margaret, who had stood by me through everything. I announced my plans at Christmas dinner. Margaret squeezed my hand under the table as I told Thomas and Lauren about the sale and my upcoming retirement. Thomas looked shocked, then concerned. Lauren's reaction was subtler, a flash of calculation in her eyes before she smiled and raised her glass in a toast. Little did I know that toast foreshadowed another, more sinister one to come. The changes in Lauren's behavior began the very next day after I announced the sale. She called me directly rather than going through Margaret as she usually did, asking detailed questions about the structure of the deal. How much would be cash? Would there be stock options? Had I considered the tax implications? These were sophisticated questions that seemed out of character for someone who had shown zero interest in the business before. She began stopping by my office unannounced, something she had never done in 7 years of marriage to Thomas. She would bring coffee and pastries, sitting across from me with that perfect posture, asking about my retirement plans. Did I plan to buy a vacation home? Would I be setting up trust funds? Was I considering philanthropic endeavors? Meanwhile, Thomas became increasingly distant. My calls went to voicemail. Our weekly father-son lunches were repeatedly rescheduled. When we did meet, he seemed distracted, checking his phone constantly. When I asked about Lauren, his answers were rehearsed, as if they had discussed what he should say. Lauren's mother, Diane, began visiting more frequently from Philadelphia. A widow with impeccable social credentials but dwindling resources, Diane had always maintained a polite but distant relationship with us. Now suddenly, she was interested in Margaret's garden and my golf game. During dinner at our home, I caught her studying the artwork and furnishings with appraising eyes. One evening, as Diane and Lauren sat on the patio thinking they were alone, I overheard a troubling exchange while retrieving wine from the cellar, which had an air vent near the patio. "The deal closes in 3 months," Lauren said. "We need to be smart about accelerating the timeline." "Has he updated the will yet?" Diane asked. "Working on it. Thomas is too soft, but he'll do what I say." When I shared this conversation with Margaret, her face fell. She'd had concerns about Lauren for years but had kept them to herself to maintain peace. Now, she revealed a pattern of manipulative behavior she had observed. Lauren isolating Thomas from his college friends. Lauren checking their bank statements while Thomas showered. Lauren subtly criticizing Thomas until he felt inadequate and dependent on her approval. A week later, Lauren suggested over Sunday dinner that I should update my will before the retirement party. "Just to make sure everything's in order with the new assets," she said casually, cutting her food into precise, tiny pieces. "I know a wonderful estate attorney who specializes in high-net-worth individuals." I smiled and thanked her for her concern. The next day, I called my longtime attorney, Franklin, and scheduled a meeting to review my existing will. I intentionally did not tell Thomas or Lauren about this meeting, but somehow, Lauren appeared in Franklin's office waiting room just as my appointment began. She claimed she was in the neighborhood and thought she'd join me for support. Franklin, professional as always, asked if I wanted her included in the meeting. I declined, saying we would catch up later. The look of frustration that flashed across Lauren's face confirmed my growing suspicions. After that meeting, I hired a private investigator, something I never imagined doing to my own family. Within 2 weeks, he delivered a troubling report. Lauren had over $100,000 in secret credit card debt spread across accounts Thomas likely knew nothing about. She had pawned jewelry that Margaret had given her for Christmas last year. Most disturbingly, she had met 3 times with a man who specialized in gray area pharmaceuticals, according to his online profiles. The investigator also uncovered Lauren's dating history before Thomas. She had exclusively dated wealthy older men, including a brief engagement to a banking executive 30 years, her senior who died unexpectedly before the wedding. The pattern was unmistakable, once laid out in the investigator's clinical report. When I tried to speak with Thomas alone about my concerns, he became defensive immediately. "Lauren has been nothing but supportive of this family," he insisted, his voice rising. "She's excited about your retirement. Why are you trying to create problems?" His reaction told me everything. He was either complicit or completely under her influence. Either way, I couldn't trust him with my suspicions. The strain began affecting my relationship with Margaret. For the first time in our marriage, we found ourselves on opposite sides of a family issue. Margaret wanted to confront Lauren directly, to lay all cards on the table. I advocated for caution, for gathering more evidence. We had tense, whispered arguments after Thomas and Lauren left our weekly family dinners. "What if you're wrong?" Margaret would ask. "What if we destroy our relationship with our only son because of unfounded suspicions? And what if I'm right?" I would counter. "What if Lauren is planning something dangerous?" Despite these tensions, preparations for my retirement party continued. I had promised employees and business associates a celebration, and I wouldn't let family drama prevent me from honoring those relationships. Invitations went out to 300 people. We booked the grand ballroom at the Four Seasons Hotel. A video tribute was being prepared by my longest-serving employees. As the date approached, I found myself watching Lauren constantly, cataloging every word, every gesture. And she was watching me too, with that calculating look poorly disguised behind her perfect smile. The evening of June 15th arrived with perfect early summer weather. Margaret and I arrived at the Four Seasons at 5:30, an hour before guests were due. The ballroom had been transformed into an elegant space with tasteful decorations in Wallace Engineering's blue and silver colors. 40 years of company history was displayed on boards around the perimeter of the room, from grainy photos of me in that first garage workshop to our current state-of-the-art facility that employed over 200 people. The event planner greeted us with champagne flutes and a tablet showing the final checklist. Everything was in order. The 5-course meal, the speeches scheduled between courses, the video tribute, and the final champagne toast that would mark the official transition of the company to Contech Industries. At 6:15, guests began arriving. Business associates I had known for decades pumped my hand enthusiastically. Former employees shared stories of the early days. Margaret stood beside me in an elegant navy dress, the perfect partner as she had been throughout our marriage. Thomas and Lauren arrived at 6:30, making an entrance that turned heads. Thomas wore a custom tuxedo, and Lauren was striking in a red gown that must have cost thousands. I noticed immediately that something was off about Thomas. His smile seemed fixed, his eyes darting around the room nervously. He hugged me briefly, the embrace awkward and stilted. Lauren, by contrast, was effusive, kissing my cheek and telling me how proud she was. "This is your night, Braden," she said, using my first name as she always did despite my preference to be called Dad. "Everything needs to be perfect for you." There was something performative about her warmth that made my skin crawl. Diane arrived shortly after, elegant in a conservative black dress. She made a beeline for me, air kissing near my cheeks and gripping my hands. "25 million, she whispered, squeezing my fingers. What an achievement. The emphasis she placed on the sum confirmed she was thinking about the money, not the decades of work it represented. Throughout the cocktail hour, I noticed Lauren being unusually attentive, bringing me fresh drinks, steering important guests my way, positioning herself in photos. Meanwhile, Thomas avoided me, circulating on the far side of the room, drinking heavily. Margaret stayed close, her hand often finding mine. A silent communication system we had perfected over 40 years. A slight squeeze meant watch that person. A double tap meant we need to talk later. As Lauren flitted around the room, Margaret's grip tightened repeatedly. At 7:30, we moved to the seated dinner portion of the evening. Lauren had insisted on helping with the seating arrangements, placing Margaret and me at the center table with Thomas, herself, Diane, and the CEO of Contech Industries and his wife. The first speeches began during the appetizer course, former colleagues sharing anecdotes about the early days of Wallace Engineering. I found myself unable to fully enjoy these tributes, my attention constantly drawn to Lauren whispering to the waitstaff, to Thomas checking his watch, to Diane watching me with an intensity that was unsettling. Between the main course and dessert, the lights dimmed for the video tribute. For 15 minutes, the screen showed the evolution of Wallace Engineering, interspersed with testimonials from employees and clients. Under normal circumstances, this would have been the highlight of the evening for me, a visual representation of my life's work. Instead, I was distracted by Lauren slipping out during the darkened room and returning just as the lights came up, adjusting her clutch purse. She caught me watching her and smiled, raising her water glass in a small toast. My unease deepened. As dessert was served, Lauren stood and clinked her glass, an unscheduled interruption. "Everyone," she called out, her voice carrying across the room with practiced projection. "We have a special toast planned to honor Braden. The waiters will be coming around with a special champagne that Thomas and I selected specifically for this moment." This was not on the event schedule. I glanced at Margaret, whose eyes reflected my concern. The catering manager approached our table, carrying a silver tray with champagne flutes. "The special reserve you requested, Mrs. Wallace," he said to Lauren. The champagne was a pale gold color, expensive looking. Lauren took charge of distributing these glasses personally, first to Margaret, then to Thomas, then to Diane. When she placed a glass in front of me, her hand lingered near it a moment too long. "We'll toast in just a few minutes," Lauren announced to the table. "Thomas has some words prepared." As conversations resumed around the table, I kept my eyes on my champagne glass without being obvious about it. Lauren excused herself to speak to the event photographer, positioning him for the toast. As she did, I noticed her clutch purse on her chair. The clasp was open, and I could see the corner of a small plastic bag inside. The unease that had been building all evening crystallized into certainty. I needed to watch my glass carefully. Sure enough, during a moment when everyone at the table was watching the event planner make an announcement about the evening's remaining schedule, Lauren returned and took her seat. As she reached for her water glass with her right hand, her left hand moved swiftly toward my champagne. Between her thumb and forefinger, I glimpsed something small and white, a tablet or powder that disappeared into my drink with barely a ripple. My heart pounded, but decades of business negotiations had taught me to keep my expression neutral, even in moments of crisis. Lauren's eyes met mine, and she smiled, a smile that now seemed predatory rather than warm. "Almost time for the toast," she said sweetly. "The culmination of your wonderful career." In that moment, I knew I needed to act, but not rashly. A direct accusation would create a scene, and without proof, would make me look paranoid. I needed to be strategic. "Excuse me," I said, standing. "I need to thank the chef before we do the toast. I'll be right back." I moved away from the table, my mind racing through options. As I pretended to speak with the catering staff, I watched our table. Lauren was now engaged in conversation with Context CEO, while Diane was checking her makeup in a compact mirror. No one was paying attention to the champagne glasses. I returned to the table from a different angle than I had left, positioning myself between Diane and my seat. As I leaned over to apparently examine one of the decorative centerpieces, I swiftly switched my champagne glass with Diane's. The movement was quick and subtle, something I had practiced in my younger days performing magic tricks for Thomas when he was a child. Taking my seat, I nodded to Lauren. "I think we're ready for that toast now." Thomas stood somewhat unsteadily, the effects of his earlier drinks evident. He cleared his throat and unfolded a small paper from his pocket. Under normal circumstances, I would have been touched by my son preparing a speech, something that didn't come naturally to him. Instead, I was watching Diane's hand as it moved toward the glass containing whatever substance Lauren had intended for me. "Ladies and gentlemen," Thomas began, his voice slightly slurred, "we're here tonight to celebrate my father, Braden Wallace, a man who built something extraordinary from nothing." My eyes darted between Thomas, Lauren, and Diane as my son continued his speech, which sounded rehearsed and somewhat mechanical. Lauren was watching me with an intensity that was unsettling, waiting for me to drink. Diane lifted her glass, my original glass, in anticipation of the toast's conclusion. "And so," Thomas was saying, "I ask you all to raise your glasses to my father, whose legacy will live on even as he enjoys a well-deserved retirement." Everyone lifted their glasses, I raised mine but didn't bring it to my lips, watching as Diane took a substantial sip from hers. Lauren's eyes narrowed slightly when she noticed I hadn't drunk yet. To Braden Wallace, the room echoed, and glasses clinked. I pretended to sip, keeping the champagne away from my lips while making the appropriate motion. Lauren seemed satisfied and turned her attention to her mother, who was now setting down her glass and resuming conversation with the Context CEO's wife. For several minutes, nothing happened. I began to wonder if I had misinterpreted what I saw, if my suspicions had led me to an unforgivable action. Then Diane put a hand to her forehead. "Is it warm in here?" she asked, her words slightly slurred. Lauren looked at her mother with mild concern. "Are you all right, Mom?" Diane blinked rapidly, just feeling a bit dizzy suddenly. Probably the champagne on an empty stomach. I watched carefully, my heart pounding. Diane's pupils had become noticeably constricted, and a slight sheen of sweat had appeared on her forehead, despite the room being comfortably cool. "Perhaps some water," I suggested, signaling a waiter. "No, I just need." Diane's sentence trailed off as her hand knocked over her water glass. She tried to write it but missed, her coordination visibly impaired. "Something's wrong," she mumbled, her words becoming increasingly indistinct. Lauren's expression shifted from mild concern to alarm. Mom, what's happening?" Within minutes of drinking from the glass, Diane's condition deteriorated rapidly. She attempted to stand and immediately stumbled, knocking her chair backward. The Context CEO's wife gasped and moved away as Diane clutched at the tablecloth, sending glasses and silverware clattering. "Call an ambulance," I commanded, rising to my feet. The room, which moments before had been filled with celebratory conversation, fell silent as attention turned to our table. Diane collapsed to the floor before anyone could catch her. Her breathing had become shallow, and her limbs were rigid. Lauren dropped to her knees beside her mother, genuine panic in her eyes now. "Mom, someone help her," Lauren screamed, all composure gone. "She needs a doctor." The hotel's security team responded quickly, followed by an emergency medical technician who had been a guest at the party. The EMT checked Diane's vital signs while the room was cleared to give them space. "Her pulse is rapid and irregular," he announced. "Has she taken any medications or drugs?" "Nothing," Lauren insisted, looking up at me with what appeared to be genuine confusion and fear. "She only had the champagne." I met her gaze steadily. "The same champagne you brought specially for the toast," I said, my voice level. Something flickered in Lauren's eyes then, a moment of realization followed by horror. She looked from me to the champagne glass I had barely touched, then back to her convulsing mother. "The ambulance is on its way," the hotel manager announced, hurrying back into the room. "They're 3 minutes out." Those 3 minutes stretched eternally. Guests gathered at the perimeter of the room, whispering among themselves. My retirement celebration had transformed into a medical emergency, and what I now knew was a criminal scene. Thomas stood frozen, looking between his wife kneeling by her mother and me standing rigidly at the table. Margaret moved to my side, gripping my arm. "Braden, what's happening?" she whispered. "Not now," I murmured back. "I'll explain everything later, but we need to make sure the police are called, not just an ambulance." Her eyes widened, but she trusted me enough not to question further. She quietly spoke to the hotel manager, who nodded and stepped away to make another call. The paramedics arrived with efficiency, quickly assessing Diane and loading her onto a stretcher. One of them asked about substances she might have ingested. "She only had champagne," Lauren repeated, her mascara streaking down her face. "I don't understand what happened." "The champagne should be tested," I said firmly, "and her glass preserved." The lead paramedic looked at me curiously, but nodded to his colleague, who carefully placed Diane's champagne glass in a plastic evidence bag. "I'm going with her," Lauren declared, moving to follow the stretcher. "Mrs. Wallace," a new voice interjected. A plainclothes detective had arrived with surprising speed. "I'm Detective Rodriguez. I need to ask you a few questions before you leave." "My mother is dying," Lauren protested. "The paramedics are taking excellent care of her," the detective said calmly, "and your answers might help them treat her more effectively." "What exactly happened before she became ill?" As Lauren reluctantly began explaining to the detective, I pulled Thomas aside, speaking low and urgently. "Your wife put something in my champagne glass, and I switched it with Diane's," I told him bluntly. Thomas stared at me, his face draining of color. "That's impossible. Lauren wouldn't." "She did. I saw her do it. And now we need to cooperate fully with the police to determine exactly what substance she used." My son's world was collapsing before my eyes, but I couldn't soften the blow. Lives were potentially at stake, including my own. The retirement party dissolved into chaos. Guests were asked to provide contact information to the police before leaving. The ballroom became a crime scene, with police tape across the entrance and technicians photographing the table setting. Through it all, I maintained a calm exterior, answering questions clearly and directly. Inside, I was grappling with the reality that my daughter-in-law had attempted to murder me on the night that should have been the culmination of my life's work. As the hotel emptied and statements were taken, one question kept returning to me. How far would this investigation go before the full extent of Lauren's betrayal was exposed? And would my family survive the revelation? The hospital waiting room at Pennsylvania General was a stark contrast to the elegant ballroom we'd left behind. Margaret sat beside me, her hand firmly in mine, while Thomas paced the sterile corridor, checking his phone compulsively. Lauren had been separated from us for questioning by Detective Rodriguez, which had sent Thomas into a state of agitated confusion. "Dad, you need to tell me exactly what you think you saw," he demanded for the third time, his voice low but intense. "I didn't think I saw anything, Thomas." "I saw it," I replied firmly. "Lauren put something in my champagne glass. I switched glasses with Diane when no one was looking. Now Diane is fighting for her life because she drank what was meant for me." Margaret squeezed my hand. She hadn't questioned my account for a moment, her faith in me one constant in this unraveling situation. "But why would she?" Thomas began, then stopped as a doctor in scrubs approached. "Are you Diane Harrington's family?" the doctor asked, looking between us. "I'm her son-in-law," Thomas said quickly. "How is she?" The doctor's expression was grave. "She stabilized, but it was close. Her toxicology screen shows a dangerous combination of sedatives and what appears to be a compound related to ricin, though in a less concentrated form. If she hadn't received treatment so quickly, the outcome would likely have been fatal." The word fatal hung in the air between us. This wasn't a prank gone wrong or an accident. This was attempted murder, and if I hadn't switched those glasses, I would be the one fighting for life in the ICU. "There are police officers who want to speak with all of you," the doctor added. "They're waiting in the consultation room." 2 detectives interviewed each of us separately. I recounted exactly what I had seen, explaining my growing suspicions over the months leading up to the retirement party. I provided contact information for my private investigator and authorized them to access his reports. I described Lauren's unusual interest in my finances following the company sale announcement. When we were brought back together, Thomas looked shell-shocked. Whatever the police had shared with him had begun to crack his denial. "They found research on untraceable poisons on Lauren's laptop," he said hollowly, "and text messages between her and someone about optimal dosages." "I'm so sorry, son," I said, and meant it. Despite everything, Thomas was a victim too, manipulated by a woman who had seen him as a path to wealth rather than a partner. The next 72 hours unfolded like a surreal nightmare. Our home was searched as part of the investigation. Lauren was detained for questioning repeatedly, but released pending formal charges. Diane gradually recovered enough to provide a statement, though she claimed no knowledge of her daughter's plans. The investigation uncovered the full extent of Lauren's deception. Financial records revealed that she and Thomas were over $600,000 in debt, most of it from Lauren's secret credit cards. Their house, which I had helped them purchase, was mortgaged to the hilt. Thomas had been completely unaware of their financial situation. More disturbing were the discoveries about Lauren's past. The private investigator's findings were confirmed and expanded by police research. Lauren's previous fiancé hadn't died of natural causes as she'd claimed to Thomas. The case had been investigated as a possible poisoning but closed due to insufficient evidence. Before that, she had dated 3 wealthy older men, each relationship ending when the men became suspicious of her motives. Most damning was her internet search history, which included queries about inheritance laws, undetectable poisons, and life expectancy after retirement. She had researched my life insurance policies and had attempted, through Thomas, to be added as a beneficiary just a month earlier, a request I had found odd and declined. The toxicology report on the champagne confirmed a lethal cocktail of substances that would have caused a heart attack, likely to be attributed to the stress and excitement of the retirement event. Lauren had planned not just a murder, but one that would potentially go undetected. On the fourth day after the party, Thomas finally requested to meet me alone. We sat in my study, the room where I had taught him to play chess as a boy, where I had advised him on college applications, where I had offered him a position in my company. "I didn't know," he said, his voice raw from what I assumed were days of arguments and revelations. "I swear to you, Dad, I didn't know what she was planning." I studied my son's face, looking for any trace of deception. I found none, only devastation and shame. "I believe you," I said simply. "The police found drafts of emails on her computer," he continued, staring down at his hands. "After you were gone, she planned to convince me to challenge Margaret for control of the estate. She had it all mapped out, including which lawyers to hire. The calculated nature of the plan chilled me. This wasn't a crime of passion or a momentary lapse in judgment. Lauren had methodically plotted my death and the subsequent theft of my life's work. "She kept talking about what we deserved," Thomas said, his voice breaking. "How I was your only son and should have more control. How the company sale proceeds should primarily benefit us, because we had our whole lives ahead of us, while you and Mom had already lived yours. I thought she was just being protective of our future, but she was. Plotting. I finished for him. She was plotting, son." Thomas nodded miserably. How did I not see it? How was I so blind? I had asked myself the same question about him for months, but seeing him broken before me, I couldn't bring myself to add to his pain with accusations. "Love makes fools of the wisest men," I said instead. "She was skilled at manipulation, and you wanted to believe in her." The district attorney's office moved swiftly, building a case for attempted murder, conspiracy, and fraud. Lauren was arrested formally a week after the party, the gravity of the charges ensuring she was held without bail. Her mother, Diane, once recovered, refused to press charges, claiming she believed her daughter had made a terrible mistake. The DA proceeded anyway, given the evidence of premeditation. Lauren's arrest made local headlines. Daughter-in-law charged in murder plot against business tycoon. Our family name, once associated with business innovation and philanthropy, was now linked to a sordid attempted murder. Colleagues and friends called with support but also with poorly disguised curiosity. Margaret handled the publicity with remarkable grace, declining interviews and issuing a brief statement, asking for privacy. Thomas withdrew completely, moving into our guest house and taking a leave of absence from the company, which was now being integrated into Context operations. 2 weeks after the party, Lauren's lawyer approached us with a plea deal offer. She would plead guilty to reduce charges in exchange for a shorter sentence. The lawyer emphasized that a trial would be public and messy, with family secrets exposed and reputations damaged further. I called a family meeting, including Franklin, my attorney. We gathered in the living room, the same space where months earlier Lauren had subtly suggested I update my will. "I want her to face the maximum penalties," Thomas said, his initial shock having hardened into anger. "She tried to kill you, Dad. A trial would be excruciating for all of us," Margaret countered. Every detail dissected in public. Reporters camped outside our home. Franklin presented the legal perspectives dispassionately, outlining the strengths of the prosecution's case and the likely outcomes with and without a trial. The decision ultimately rested with me as the intended victim. I took a day to consider, walking the grounds of our home, reflecting on justice versus practical considerations. In the end, I agreed to the plea deal with one condition. Lauren would have to make a full confession, not just to the court but to Thomas, detailing every aspect of her plan and when it began. I wanted my son to hear the truth directly from her, to help him fully break free from her manipulation. The legal proceedings moved forward with clinical efficiency. Lauren accepted the modified plea deal. The The confession session was arranged with lawyers present. Thomas emerged from it ashen but resolute, finally accepting the full reality of who he had married. "She never loved me," he said afterward, his voice hollow. "I was just access to you and your money." She admitted she'd been planning this since our second date, when she found out about Wallace Engineering. The 7-year relationship had been a lie from the beginning, a long con with my son, as both accomplice and victim. My heart broke for him even as I processed my own sense of betrayal. Diane's recovery was slow but steady. Despite her daughter's actions, Margaret insisted we ensure she had proper care, a decision that spoke to my wife's character. 3 weeks after the incident, Diane requested to speak with me privately. We met in her hospital room, the machines monitoring her vital signs, creating a rhythmic backdrop to an uncomfortable conversation. "I didn't know what Lauren planned," she said immediately, her voice still raspy from the intubation she had required. "You have to believe that." I studied her carefully. Unlike Thomas, whose innocence had been clear in his devastated reaction, Diane's involvement remained ambiguous to me. "The police found texts between you discussing the timeline and my will," I said evenly. "That suggests some awareness." Diane closed her eyes briefly. "Lauren was always obsessed with money. Her father left us with debts, not inheritance, despite the family name. She grew up watching her friends enjoy wealth while we scraped by on appearances. I knew she married Thomas for financial stability. Yes, but murder?" She shook her head. "I never imagined she would go that far. Yet you discussed my will with her, strategized about accessing my assets," I pressed. "I thought she was just positioning for a larger inheritance after your natural passing," Diane admitted, a statement that was hardly exonerating. "Lauren has significant debts, shopping addiction, gambling. Thomas doesn't know the half of it." This aligned with my investigators' findings. Lauren had secret credit cards with staggering balances and had made regular trips to Atlantic City when supposedly visiting childhood friends in Philadelphia. "The financial pressure was crushing her," Diane continued. "When you announced the company's sale, she saw an opportunity, $25 million. She became fixated on it, and you encouraged this fixation," I stated rather than asked. Diane had the grace to look ashamed. I asked questions, suggested approaches for ensuring Thomas received a significant portion. "But poisoning you? Never." Her heart monitor beeped more rapidly. "She nearly killed me instead." There was genuine betrayal in her voice. Even Diane, who had been willing to scheme for access to my money, had been unprepared for the extremes of her daughter's desperation. "Will you press charges against me?" she asked finally. "That depends on your full cooperation with the prosecutors," I replied. "And one other thing." "What's that?" "A complete financial accounting of what Lauren owes and to whom. Thomas deserves to know exactly what he's facing." Diane agreed readily, perhaps recognizing it as a lighter consequence than she deserved. The following week, a family meeting of a different sort occurred. Thomas, Margaret, Franklin, and I met with financial advisors to understand the full extent of the debt Lauren had accumulated in Thomas's name and her own. The total was staggering, nearly $800,000 across credit cards, personal loans, and home equity lines. Thomas had been completely unaware of most of it, having trusted Lauren to manage their household finances. "How will I ever repay this?" Thomas asked, looking shell-shocked. "We'll handle it," I assured him, "but with conditions." The conditions were straightforward. Thomas would enter financial counseling and therapy. He would work with debt consolidation specialists. He would return to work at Contech, which had agreed to keep him on in a restructured role. Most importantly, he would take full responsibility for his future rather than expecting rescue. "I won't let you face bankruptcy," I told him, "but I won't enable dependency either. This is a reset, not a bailout." Thomas nodded, a flicker of the determination I'd always hoped to see in him finally emerging. "I understand, and I won't let you down again." As the legal proceedings against Lauren continued, the family began the difficult process of healing. Margaret organized weekly dinners that deliberately created new traditions, seating arrangements, and menus, symbolically breaking from the past. Thomas threw himself into work and therapy with equal vigor. I focused on supporting them both, while protecting the assets I'd spent a lifetime building. Lauren's plea agreement was finalized in court 6 months after the retirement party. She pleaded guilty to attempted murder, conspiracy, and fraud in exchange for a 20-year sentence with possibility of parole after 15 years. The judge, unmoved by her tearful statement of remorse, noted the extensive premeditation and the betrayal of family bonds. Thomas attended the sentencing hearing but chose not to deliver a victim impact statement. "Nothing I say will change who she is or what she did," he explained. "I'm focusing on moving forward." I did speak, however. I stood in the courtroom and looked directly at the woman who had plotted my death for financial gain, who had manipulated my son and betrayed the trust of our family. "Lauren Wallace," I began, using the name she had been so eager to acquire 7 years earlier. "You saw me not as a father-in-law, but as an obstacle to wealth. You viewed my life's work not as a legacy built through decades of honest effort, but as a prize to be seized. You considered my life disposable once its financial value could be transferred to you." Lauren kept her eyes down, her designer outfit replaced by prison garb, her perfect posture diminished. "But here's what you failed to understand," I continued. "True wealth isn't found in bank accounts or property deeds. It's found in relationships built on trust and mutual respect. It's found in creating something of value through honest work. By focusing solely on money, you've lost everything of real worth, including your freedom." As I returned to my seat beside Margaret, I felt a weight lifting. The betrayal would always be part of our family story, but it would not define us or destroy what I had built over a lifetime of integrity. The year following Lauren's sentencing was one of profound reconstruction for our family. The initial shock and betrayal gave way to a quieter, more persistent pain that surfaced in unexpected moments. I would catch Thomas staring at wedding photos I hadn't yet removed from the mantel. Margaret would hesitate before answering the phone, fearing more media inquiries about the poisoning case. I would wake in the night, remembering the moment I saw Lauren's hand hover over my champagne glass, and wonder how I could have missed the danger living within our family circle for 7 years. Healing began slowly. Thomas sold the house he had shared with Lauren, unable to remain in spaces filled with memories of her deception. He purchased a modest condo closer to us and to the Contech offices. The process of decluttering their shared possessions was therapeutic for him, a literal and symbolic removal of Lauren's influence from his life. "I found receipts for jewelry I never saw her wear," he told me one evening as we shared a beer on my back porch. Credit card statements for restaurants in Atlantic City when she was supposedly visiting her college roommate. The signs were everywhere, but I chose not to see them. "We see what we want to see in those we love," I replied. "I've made the same mistake in business partnerships, trusted the wrong people despite warning signs." This was true, though not to the same extent. In my early career, I had been deceived by a supplier who sold me substandard materials, nearly bankrupting my fledgling company. The lesson had been expensive but had taught me to verify everything, a practice I had somehow failed to apply to my son's wife. Margaret's recovery took a different path, always the emotional backbone of our family. She initially focused entirely on supporting Thomas and me. 3 months after the sentencing, I found her crying quietly in our bedroom, finally allowing herself to process her own feelings of betrayal and fear. "I could have lost you," she said when I held her. "All those years together, and it could have ended because of her greed." We began seeing a family therapist, both as a couple and with Thomas. Dr. Winters specialized in family trauma and betrayal, helping us understand how Lauren had identified and exploited vulnerabilities in our family system. Thomas had craved approval his whole life, feeling he could never meet my standards. Lauren had positioned herself as his champion against perceived paternal judgment. Margaret had prioritized family harmony over addressing concerning behaviors. I had focused on business success, sometimes at the expense of emotional awareness. "Healthy families aren't perfect families," Dr. Winters told us. "They're families that can acknowledge their vulnerabilities and work together to address them." 6 months into our therapy, Thomas brought a date to Sunday dinner. Andrea was a project manager at Contech, intelligent and straightforward in a way Lauren never had been. The contrast was striking. Where Lauren had been calculating in her charm, Andrea was genuinely engaged in conversation. Where Lauren had flattered excessively, Andrea respectfully disagreed with some of my business perspectives. Margaret squeezed my hand under the table, a signal of approval. The company sale proceeds, which Lauren had coveted so desperately, were now being put to constructive use. After ensuring our retirement was secure, I established the Wallace Family Foundation with a $10 million endowment. The foundation focused on two areas: supporting small business entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds and funding education about financial literacy and relationship manipulation. From poison to purpose, Margaret said when we finalized the foundation paperwork. It became our private motto, a reminder that even the darkest experiences could yield positive transformation. Thomas gradually took on a leadership role in the foundation, discovering a talent for identifying promising business proposals and mentoring new entrepreneurs. It was the executive potential I had always hoped he possessed, finally emerging now that he was free from Lauren's influence and the pressure of following directly in my footsteps. 1 year after the failed poisoning attempt, we held a small, private gathering at our home. Not a retirement party this time, but a celebration of new beginnings. The guests included only our closest friends, Thomas and Andrea, and a few key colleagues from the foundation. During dinner, Thomas stood unexpectedly and raised his glass. "A year ago, our family faced its darkest moment," he said, his voice strong and clear. "What was meant to destroy us instead forced us to rebuild something stronger. Dad, you've taught me that true success isn't measured in dollars but in integrity. Mom, you've shown me that love sometimes means setting difficult boundaries. Together, you've demonstrated that the strongest relationships can weather even betrayal and emerge more resilient." As he spoke, I reflected on the strange, painful journey of the past year. The retirement I had envisioned, filled with golf games and travel, had been replaced by something more meaningful: deeper family connections, purposeful philanthropy, and hard-won wisdom. The wealth Lauren had been willing to kill for had ultimately done more good in the world than it ever could have in her grasping hands. Thomas had found authentic confidence far from her manipulations. Margaret and I had discovered new dimensions to our partnership after 40 years together. Even Diane, who had completed her own therapy program, had found a measure of peace by volunteering with organizations helping women escape financial abuse. Later that evening, as the gathering wound down, I stood on the back terrace, looking at the stars, a glass of scotch in my hand. Margaret joined me, sliding her arm through mine. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "How different things might have been," I admitted, "if I hadn't seen her slip something into my glass, if I hadn't switched them." "But you did see it," Margaret said firmly, "because you were paying attention when it mattered most. That's always been your gift in business and, when it counted, in family too." The simple truth of her statement settled over me. Throughout my career, I had prided myself on attention to detail, on seeing problems before they became catastrophes. That same vigilance had saved my life, and ultimately, saved our family. The poisoned glass intended for you became the catalyst for healing we didn't know we needed, Margaret continued. There's a lesson in that, I think. Sometimes the thing meant to destroy us becomes the thing that saves us, if we're brave enough to confront it. As we stood together under the night sky, I felt profound gratitude for this woman who had stood beside me through decades of challenges, for my son who was finding his way back to authenticity, and even for the painful wisdom that comes only through surviving betrayal. What was your experience hearing this story? Have you ever had your trust betrayed by someone close to you? How did you recover? And what lessons did you learn? Please share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video if my story resonated with you. Remember, even our darkest moments can become the foundation for our greatest strength. Thank you for listening, and I'll be back next week with another story from my journey.